Alright guys, yet again we are here with even more Demon Slayer content to enjoy. If you are a fan of the Kyojuro Rengoku Gaiden storyline that we covered in a previous video, then you are absolutely going to love this one. This is Kyojuro Rengoku Gaiden, the story of how Rengoku became the Flame HASHIRA. To begin this story, we find ourselves with a rather disturbing situation as a figure contemplated how long he had been talking about a mysterious individual, all the while gripping onto a pistol as a young demon slayer laid quaking in fear with severed limbs surrounded by several canine monstrosities. The figure would then go on to describe the man haunting his memories to be someone who possesses ominous eyes like that of a rooster, the one person they refused to ever forgive, as they very much intended on getting their revenge. The haunting memories were driving them mad as they could feel the person's presence clinging to the back of their very mind. The tension and pressure continued to ramp up in their head until suddenly they'd fire off a shot directly into their own skull. The young demon slayer was of course startled by this, but certainly had more pressing issues at hand as the ravenous canines would inch closer and closer before eating him alive as the figure rose back to their feet, clutching onto their head. With the blood spilling from their cranium, the demon would express relief as they'd nearly died from the utter rage of it all, as again they would recenter and wonder just how much they had talked about this plaguing figure in their mind. As we would then see their iris reveal the designation of their status. This was Lower Moon 2 of the 12 demon moons, the 8th strongest demon in existence aside from Kimetsu Muzan himself. Elsewhere, we find a rather passionate, if not one-sided sparring match between Kyojuro Rengoku and Mitsuri Kanroji. He'd urge her to try harder as she struggled to defend against its onslaught and would instead continue to complain about her hunger despite recently having lunch. Rengoku would insist on another 1,000 strikes, however, to interrupt this training would be Kyojuro's younger brother, Senjuro, who had prepared snacks for the both of them. Mitsuri would immediately smother the young boy for being her savior, yet Rengoku was not done with her just yet. Although his brother's mention of having made Japanese sweet potatoes was enough to convince the young flame that a break was indeed a pretty good idea. Mitsuri and her crazy appetite were absolutely loving the Sakura mochi, as Rengoku was rather impressed by the sweet potato, which Mitsuri had only just taught the young boy how to make. And of course it wouldn't be a Rengoku meal without a declaration of just how delicious the food is. But during this, Rengoku would urge his little brother to bring something he had previously prepared, as the boy would then return with a haori. Apparently, it had taken some time to complete, but it was Rengoku's gift to Mitsuri in celebration of her officially joining the Demon Slayers. You see, with this being a time prior to Rengoku being a HASHIRA, it was also a time before Mitsuri became the Love HASHIRA as well. Rengoku was very proud of Mitsuri, as apparently she had passed final selection with only 6 months of Demon Slayer training under her belt, what was pretty much half the time it typically took someone to prepare and succeed. And so no longer would their relationship be that of master and student, but rather as comrades, a sentiment that brought tears of joy to the young maiden's eyes. With that, she would change into her uniform as well. And it was a pretty interesting fit, to say the least. Rengoku was horrified by the state of her uniform, and so his brother would question if such a thing wasn't the normal Demon Slayer attire, which as far as Rengoku was concerned, it absolutely was not. Mitsuri was becoming pretty concerned herself at this point, but would tell her former master that the Kakushi had assigned it to her and said it was perfect. What was more than likely an act of perversion, but seeing as both of these characters aren't exactly the brightest, Rengoku was convinced the moment he heard it was officially sanctioned that there must be some reasoning behind it. But at this point, given Mitsuri's exposure, even the young Senjuro would have to wonder if it was in fact normal. However, to interrupt this leisurely talk would be a messenger crow summoning the Flame HASHIRA to an immediate pillar meeting. The Flame HASHIRA at the time, of course, being Rengoku Sr. In recognition of this, Rengoku would make his way to his father's chambers. His father, however, refused to go. He would furthermore express that if Kyojuro wanted to go, then he could go on ahead. However, none of that stuff mattered to him anymore. Now Rengoku would begin to try and speak and convince his father, as suddenly an empty alcohol gourd would be thrown in his direction and crash into the wall. He would yell at his son, refusing any sort of conversation, and furthermore state that the breath of flames and the HASHIRA position was all worthless nonsense. And as his father's haori hung on the rack, Rengoku would recall the words of his late mother, that only the flame pillar was allowed to wear that haori, and that he would one day become an exceptional flame pillar just like his father. From there, we would be taken to the meeting of the HASHIRA, as at that point, it had been about 6 months since the last time they had all convened like this. And at this time, rather than having the 9 HASHIRA, there were only 5. The master would inquire about how his HASHIRA were faring, but they had no complaints and were more so interested in the master's health situation. With that, Ubeyashiki would express an increased sense of loneliness and the fact that Kibutsuji Muzan's strength continues to grow. And as such, he would ask for their forgiveness in asking more of them in the coming times, as they would need to work even harder going forwards. Sanemi would humbly agree to this before asking a question of the master, inquiring why exactly a non-HASHIRA swordsman was among them, and what exactly happened to the flame pillar Kyojuro Rengoku, who, given their collectively young ages, would have been the oldest among them by far. Now, Rengoku would attempt to explain the situation, but Sanemi would interrupt him immediately, questioning if he was truly fit to be a HASHIRA, as a jolt would be felt by Rengoku, as this was the pressuring aura of the HASHIRA. That these were the ever-loyal people who'd sacrifice themselves to support the entirety of the demon slayers and have battled against the absolute strongest of demons, noticing that they were even distinct in appearance. And with that, what he felt for all of them was an overwhelming sense of respect. Now, the master would then tell Sanemi not to pick on Rengoku all too much, as he had actually called him over to explain the situation personally, and with that, Sanemi immediately lowered his head. The sensation Rengoku felt from the master was entirely different, as he was incredibly mysterious yet calming like a soft spring breeze. The master would then request that Rengoku speak, and so he would. He would express that ever since his mother Ruka passed away, his father had lost all will to fight, that he had begun drinking while on duty and continued to shut himself away in his room, even drinking endlessly before his missions. The stone HASHIRA Gyome Himejima was saddened by this, considering how long Shinjuro had served the pillars, but given the situation they were currently in, there was no time for such weakness. The sound HASHIRA Tengen Uzui would add to this by saying that Shinjuro was setting a bad example for the forces beneath him and was negatively impacting their morale, and so a retirement was in order as far as he was concerned. Sanemi would express that he was bothered by the fact that they were lacking in their number of pillars, but regardless, a drunkard wouldn't be of any use to them either way. With that, Rengoku would very boldly pipe up by saying that there wasn't anything to worry about, because if he were to become a HASHIRA, then surely his father would regain his motivation to fight, a prospect that unsettled most of them. Sanemi would recognize Rengoku's confidence and explain that being a HASHIRA wasn't as sweet as he was making it out to be. Rengoku would respond by saying that he knew the promotion requirements for becoming a HASHIRA rather well, in fact, and so Sanemi would rise to his feet. The stone HASHIRA would try to dissuade him, but Sanemi would ask for his and the master's forgiveness, as he would swiftly rush over and kick Rengoku in the side of the head. Gyome and Tengen were concerned, but Sanemi just kept on going. Blow after blow, he would urge Rengoku to become a HASHIRA already and start running around hunting demons. He'd mockingly say that they had plenty of seats available and would question when Rengoku planned on sitting amongst them. Rengoku would keep his guard up, but Sanemi would tell him to hit back already, as Rengoku would catch the Wind HASHIRA's elbow and fiercely proclaim that he would never hit him, that swordsmen are forbidden from hitting one another, and that he would never harm another human being. Now, this sentiment served to take Sanemi completely off guard, as Rengoku would begin patting him on the back and commend his seriousness and the burning passion he could sense from within. Believing this to all be in good faith, he would even thank Sanemi and tell him that he planned on doing his best. This exchange was enough for Shinobu to conclude that Rengoku was yet another weirdo, as Tengen was pretty amused by Rengoku's extravagance and would decide that he liked him. Meanwhile, Sanemi was really flustered, but with that, the master would softly call to Sanemi, and in response, the Wind HASHIRA would quickly drop down to his hands and knees and beg for the master's forgiveness, admitting that he got a bit too heated. And so from the master, this was a taming feat of words the likes of which Rengoku had never seen before. Rengoku too would then drop to his knees as the master would address him directly. Given that Rengoku was aware of the conditions required to become a HASHIRA, the master would express that they have information about a demon near the capital that they believe to be one of the 12 demon moons, a demon whose extermination he had decided to entrust Rengoku with. which was no minor declaration, as the 12 demon moons are the direct subordinates of Kibutsuji Muzan and capable of slaughtering even HASHIRA by themselves. Yet the master chose to entrust him with this task. At this point, Shinobu would interject by saying that if the target was to be one of the 12 moons, that one of them should be entrusted with the task instead. However, the master would refuse, as to do so would be to give them a mission outside of their designated patrol region. That this occurrence was within the region of Rengoku's father. The master would make it clear to Rengoku that if he desired to become a pillar of the Demon Slayers, he shouldn't just tell him, but show him with his actions, as by doing so, they would all accept him with open arms. It was up to him to show them his power, as Rengoku would happily agree. Now, as Rengoku marched onwards leaving this place, Gyome would ask the master if he actually saw victory in the boy's future or merely intuition. However, the master would instead denote it to be more similar to confirmation. Confirmation that Kyojuro Rengoku would eventually become someone who would change the destiny of the Demon Slayers in the near future. Overall, this exchange during a HASHIRA meeting was pretty similar to Tanjiro's presence during one, which I think is pretty cool. From there, however, our story would take us to the streets of Tokyo. Here, Rengoku would have his troops split up into groups of 2 in search of the demon, and if they were to find him, they would need to summon Rengoku himself via Messenger Crow, all the while prioritizing the evacuation of the citizens. They were here to not only take down this demon, but to protect the peace of the capital. And as he proclaimed this, Mitsuri would fawn over a commanding Rengoku and was just as happy about their matching Haoris. But to interrupt this thought, Rengoku would express how happy he was to be working with her in the field for the very first time. And so now, flustered by her inappropriate thoughts somewhat aligning with reality, she would scramble before a young boy would accidentally run into her. She would immediately rush to the little boy's aid as he would begin sobbing, but his mother would be quick to enter the fray and assume Mitsuri to be endangering her child. She'd be quick to jump to conclusions about Mitsuri being a kidnapper on account of her odd hair color and sword, and as such would threaten to call the police. But to settle down the situation, Rengoku would lift the young boy onto his shoulder and express that the kid just tripped and fell, which the mother would actually listen to. And that is a bit strange considering Rengoku also had odd hair and a sword, but whatever. The kid would actually point out Rengoku's hair, which Rengoku was very proud of as it had been in his family for generations. In fact, he would explain that the color was due to his ancestors eating way too much shrimp tempura. And as silly as this is, hair color in the Demon Slayer world does change on account of weird things like this, and hair color is something Mitsuri is really self-conscious about, and so she was a bit ashamed. But in noticing this, Rengoku would do his best to comfort her. But as he too continued the patrol, a nearby explosion would suddenly go off. Rengoku would clutch onto Mitsuri, but soon after, yet another explosion would go off and unfortunately kill some of the Demon Slayers that had come along with them. Now, before Rengoku could stop her, Mitsuri would insist on running off to help, as he would only just barely manage to pull on her Haori enough for a long distance shot to miss her face. As atop a nearby building, there was an active shooter with a rifle aimed in the direction. The shooter, who was absolutely shaking with excitement, would attempt to calm himself down as he had eagerly awaited the fruition of his revenge for oh so very long. But as he recentered his aim, suddenly his target was nowhere to be found. As in a flash, Rengoku would unleash flame-breathing first form, unknowing fire, and rake across the demon's flesh. Rengoku was here. And as he approached, the demon remembered that all of his efforts were for the sake of this day, as we would now see him totally. He was here for revenge against Rengoku. Again, this was Lower Moon 2. Now, the conditions for ascending to the seat of HASHIRA were simple on paper. Firstly, you need to be of at least Kinoe rank, what is one of the 10 Demon Slayer ranks aside from HASHIRA, and the highest Demon Slayer rank aside from HASHIRA. Now, to be frank, these ranks were established within the first 10 chapters of the series, and it would seem that at least in regards to story, Gotoge threw them out entirely, as we have absolutely no mention of anyone being anything besides the beginner rank of Mizunoto and the exceptional rank of HASHIRA. That is with the exception of anyone who ultimately became a HASHIRA, but I digress. The second stipulation being that one must either exterminate over 50 demons or defeat one of the 12 demon moons. And so with the confirmation that this was one of the 12, Rengoku's graduation of sorts stood before him. And he was furious that this demon would so indiscriminately attack even civilians. The demon would mostly disregard this, but would instead make it clear that he would never forget the shame Rengoku had given him, that he had sworn his revenge and spent several years bolstering his strength to the point where he is now one of the 12 demon moons. He would then declare this to be his hated enemy's final night and raise his pistol, as Rengoku would look him dead in his eyes and ask, "Who are you?" The demon was speechless. He'd begun to stutter and asked the demon slayer if he'd actually forgotten, but Rengoku would make it clear that he never forgets and furthermore has never met the demon a day in his life, that this was their very first and only encounter. The demon was now shaking without words as Rengoku would continue to verbally reprimand him, saying that he should use his common sense, that a swordsman would never associate with a demon. The demon was absolutely losing it at this point and would then suddenly place his pistol inside of his mouth and fire. Rengoku was now confused by this and the guy's motive, as the demon did so to calm himself down, and after doing so would decide that if Rengoku had forgotten, then until he was able to remember, boom! Another explosion would go off. Ticking time bombs had been scattered all over the capital. But these explosions weren't the only thing to worry about, as suddenly Rengoku would be assailed by rapid gunfire, as extending from the demon, there was an absolute surplus of firearms. The demon would continuously fire as Rengoku fled for cover, but this time, extending from beneath him, the shadows had eyes and teeth, with guns now extending from them as well, and they would fire. Rengoku would now use the fourth form, Blooming Flame Undulation, to destroy the billboard he was previously hiding behind, and suddenly close the gap between him and the devil, as in retaliation, the fiend would fire off. But as the bullet grazed the demon slayer, he would slam his blade into the demon's neck. However, much to his surprise, his blade had been repelled by the very same shadowy substance. The demon was now cackling, as the man before him wasn't on par with the one he remembered, now expressing that you should always stay calm during a battle. What is a rather hypocritical bit of advice indeed. Now, within the demon's shadows was a bottomless pit on account of his blood demon art, and from that void would suddenly drop several sticks of dynamite as boom! The roof of the building they were on would be utterly destroyed. Mitsuri would be worried for her former master, but would then see the lower half of a demon and rush in to combat it, as from behind, a regenerating top half would grip onto her hair and recognize her to be Rengoku's subordinate and proclaim her hair to be disgraceful just as his was. He'd slam her to the ground before placing his rifle directly over her forehead. He would urge her to settle down, as Rengoku was in fact alive, albeit on the verge of death. But he refused to let his target die so easily, as he wanted his revenge to be as excruciatingly painful as possible. And so he planned on torturing Rengoku's family and friends right in front of his eyes. That knowing just how long someone has left before a mental breakdown was his specialty back when he was still human. He planned on pushing her to the farthest limitations of human pain so that she would never forget him and be plagued by thoughts of revenge just as he was. That the demon slayers were utterly pathetic nobodies that would never be known or accepted and would all die pathetic deaths. Mitsuri would then think about her past and begin to cry, as to her rescue it would be Rengoku with the fifth form, Flame Tiger. He would repel the demon and let Mitsuri know that even if nobody accepts them, they fight to protect humans from demons, and that's what it means to be a demon slayer. He would remember his father for a moment, and now for himself, express that no matter how pathetic he was, he would carry out his duties. He would then from there order Mitsuri to go disarm the bombs all over the capital along with the other swordsmen. That for whatever reason, the demon was fixated on him, and so he would be the one to defeat it. A notion the demon found to be preposterous, as his neck was virtually uncuttable. And even more than that, a sword would never beat a gun. Same as how the demon slayers would never beat the demons. Rengoku would then recall the words of his late mother. The Rengoku family had been hunting demons for generations, and we are talking about before elemental breath styles were even a thing. The status of Flame Pillar was the pride of their family, and so she would urge her son to set his sights on becoming an amazing HASHIRA like his father. That he had a flame in his soul, one strong enough to burn evil demons to a crisp, and so he should kindly shine his light on people and keep the sun-like flame in his heart ablaze by becoming a HASHIRA. With this, Rengoku would express that he wasn't sure who the demon was mistaking him for, but his name was Kyojuro Rengoku, and he would cut down the demon's grudge here and now. The demon would then make use of his blood demon art, Plunder Cavity, Shadow Wolf, as several of these canine shadows would emerge and rush Rengoku, who would leap above and opt to use the fourth form, Blooming Flame Undulation, to deal with them, as from above, several Molotov cocktails would rain down and set the area ablaze. Now at this point, in seeing the flames, the demon would recall his own trauma, as the Flame HASHIRA stood before him several years ago. At the time, he would be questioned as to why someone's life had been taken to the afterlife while a worthless piece of filth, like a demon, managed to survive. The Flame HASHIRA, Rengoku's father, was of course referring to how his beloved wife's life had ended. The demon, who was backed into a corner, would beg to stop being cut up and hurt, but it was no use. The HASHIRA would continue to cut off his limbs endlessly as he would beg for mercy. The HASHIRA would express how tired he was and how utterly pointless his efforts were as well. He'd eventually question if the demon was going to flee like a coward despite being a demon, wondering if he planned on escaping like this until he finally met his end. What this demon remembered was a terrifying man that shared the very same visage as Kyojuro while holding a gourd of alcohol as he slashed him to pieces repeatedly. That despite his wounds now having healed, his fear and rage had never truly settled since, as in his panic of recalling all this, he'd have to again shoot himself in the head to settle down. He simply could not bear to live constantly in fear like this. And seeing an opportunity here, Rengoku would go in for an attack, but would quickly be propelled backwards, as for the demon would be even more heavy fire, as he would unveil a Gatling gun from his abdomen, crying out for his revenge. Rengoku would furthermore remember the words of his younger brother, that ever since their mother passed away, their father had been hiding away in his bed. And so Senjuro would wonder if his father was set to die like their mother. Kyojuro would urge his brother not to think of such things, as certainly their father would pick himself back up one day. But in seeing this, he felt an even greater need as the firstborn son of the Rengoku family to become stronger. He didn't want his little brother to cry. Nobody can stay in the world forever, but the sadness that they feel for the departed was to become their strength as well. And so as he clashed with the demon, he again thought back to his promise to protect the weak that he had made to his mother. The promise to become a HASHIRA. Now elsewhere, while Rengoku bought them all time, the other demon slayers were battling against several of these shadow wolves and searching for the bombs. Mitsuri had discovered one, but had never seen one before and would need to be instructed by the crow on how to disarm it. But before that could happen, several wolves would begin to attack. Mitsuri would panic before striking one of them, however, she could not manage to cut them as her blade got stuck on their body. She tried not to panic and simply breathe as she had been taught, but during this time, one of the wolves would bite into her thigh, pulling her down for the others to attack. Try as she might, Mitsuri could not unleash the breath of flames that Rengoku had taught her. In truth, all that she could do was use her brute strength to slash around. She'd wonder if she was even cut out to be a demon slayer as she'd begin to cry and hope for Rengoku to save her. As just then, she would hear a scream and look over to see a young boy defending his mother while they were both being attacked as well. The same two that had previously bumped into her. And in seeing this, she would suddenly tear herself from the pack of wolves and rush in their direction, quickly destroying one of the attacking wolves in a single strike as she defended the two of them. Her body had moved faster than her mind, and so she was amazed that she actually managed to cut one of them. But thanks to this display, the ones remaining would begin to howl and call for even more to enter the fray. Again, Mitsuri would get a bit scared, but begin to get a hold of herself as she recalled the strong back of Rengoku previously defending her. Mitsuri would commend the little boy for defending his mother like he did, and tell him just to hold on for a little while longer, as she would be sure to make the bad puppies go away. And so now rushing towards them, she would throw the bomb in the air, grip onto her blade, and recall the words Rengoku had shared with her during their training, that she tends to rashly use her muscles and can even cut down lesser demons as she was, but swords weren't meant to be swung with just a person's arms, but with their entire bodies. as in a single jaunt, Mitsuri was able to destroy several of the wolves and even catch the bomb before it fell, as she used a sword like an extension of her own body. She now finally understood what Rengoku was trying to tell her back then. And once more, at the time, she did not feel like she was cut out to be a demon slayer. But Rengoku kept her going. He taught her that the duty of those born strong is to help the weak, a lesson his late mother taught him. And he even believed that one day she would be an even greater swordsman than him, and not just in terms of her brute strength and flexible body. He believed that her unique hair color was a special trait all by itself, as it would be able to draw in demons and brighten people's days, and that above all else, she possesses a heart that loves people, and that he is the luckiest man alive to have been her master, and is quite proud of that fact. And as she sliced apart these wolves, Mitsuri would remember that just like how she was looking for a husband, she was also looking for a place where she could truly be herself. More flexible, more graceful, more like her. Now feeling as though the palpitations of her heart would never cease, she would turn her burning love into her sword. And it was at this moment that Mitsuri had truly mastered the sword and created the love-breathing style, as she took out the final beast and managed to catch a bomb between her legs. She would swiftly check up on the mother and child, who were just fine. Mitsuri would now share a smile and explain that her hair ended up the way it is because she ate too much sakura mochi. It wouldn't be too long before the Kakushi came to help out, but she had things she needed to do, so she needed to leave. And as she left, the child would thank her, much to her surprise. The kid then got his mother to do the very same, as they'd both thank her for saving their lives, which brought tears to Mitsuri's eyes, as finally she was accepted. But getting back to the ever-heated battle between Rengoku and Lower Moon 2, the demon would push Rengoku back, and then notice that there wasn't an explosion at the time of expected detonation, and that he could sense a loss in some wolves, and so he seriously needed to finish things up before the situation became any more precarious, as again Rengoku would go for the demon's neck. This time he would instead break the demon's gun, but even still, it was remarkable to the demon that a human possessed this degree of resilience. After so many bullets and explosions, it was unbelievable that Rengoku could still stand, let alone attack. The demon would continue to fire and endlessly wonder how Rengoku could possibly stand up to him with only a sword. But as a bloodied and passionate Rengoku approached him, the demon would have to wonder if the man before him was really the same man he had met that dreaded day. The demon would fire again, but nothing. He was out of bullets. He couldn't believe that a single man was responsible for him cleaning out his entire arsenal, as Rengoku would approach like a monster, questioning if the demon was done already, which drove the creature insane. He would raise his gun to his head yet again in an attempt to remain calm, but again, he was out of bullets, and so in a fit of rage, he would slam the blasted thing onto the ground. Now desperate, he'd search the entirety of his void for something he could still use. He needed to deny this man the satisfaction, as otherwise he would die from his own rage. The demon would search for a while before clattering out from within was but a single poorly kept and weathered katana. At the sight of it, the demon would remember his human past. He remembered being ridiculed for using a sword, as it was believed to be a dying art of the past. He would be told by the men to defeat them and their bullets with his precious art of Bushido, as the men laughed, littering him with bullets. He'd remember his comrades who believed that their swords would never lose to guns. But in the present, as the demon just stood there unmoving, Rengoku seized the opportunity and rushed in, as suddenly the shadows would cause a rush of power. Rengoku would skid back, as now clutching onto this old blade was the demon using his ultimate technique. Plunder Cavity, Ravaged War Formation Wolf. An absolutely terrifying sight indeed. He had gathered all of his remaining shadows and cloaked himself in them. And so if Rengoku touched them for even a single second, he'd be cut apart instantly. The demon would now formally introduce himself, recognizing Rengoku not to be the man from his past. His name was Hairo, and he would request that Rengoku allow him to slay him as a warrior of the sword. Rengoku in turn would agree to a duel, as it was just what he wanted. Now mind you, the suction and defenses the demon now boasted were far superior to that of his wolves and what he had previously employed to protect his neck, And so, Rengoku would determine that the only thing for him to do was to wield his sword better than the demon could. They would both prepare themselves and remain like this for a chilling moment, before rushing towards one another in a flash as their blades collided. The demon believed that his blood demon art could never be broken, as a moment later, his shadows would begin to be burned away. This technique was the 9th form, the ultimate technique of the flame-breathing art and the basis of his family's name. A slash that pours one's body, soul, and even life into its power that can burn away at anything. Rengoku would set his heart ablaze and use the 9th form, Rengoku, to defeat Lower Moon 2. It was over. And as the demon vanished, he would commend his opponent's swordsmanship. Rengoku was exhausted and on the verge of collapse, but he refused to just yet, as he needed to keep moving in order to defuse the bombs. But before he could take even one more step, Mitsuri would grab hold of him as she cried. They had defused all the bombs, and he had done it. Rengoku had defeated one of the 12 demon moons, and was now set to become a HASHIRA. The flame HASHIRA at that. The others would yell at Mitsuri to get out of the way so that they could patch him up, but she refused to let him go and was way too strong for them to pry away from him. Which now takes us to the aftermath of this mission, where we would have a bandaged Rengoku return home with Mitsuri as they both hugged his brother as his father listened in from afar. And after Rengoku had fully healed up, the master would acknowledge him and commend him for his amazing feat, then asking him if he would support the Demon Slayers as one of the pillars, which Rengoku would very happily accept, as Sanemi was looking pretty foolish at the moment. Unfortunately, despite his best hopes, Rengoku's father would never return to the fray of the Demon Slayers, but at the very least, Kyojuro had fulfilled the promise he made to his mother and could now proudly wear the Haori of the Flame HASHIRA. And during his time as a HASHIRA, he was there to welcome his former student Mitsuri among their ranks, and even Muichiro and Obanai as well, formulate plans with his comrades, and even keep Sanemi out of trouble. He truly did live a meaningful life till the bitter end. But now skipping ahead to after his passing, both Mitsuri and Tanjiro would suddenly smell the scent of cherry blossoms in the air despite the spring season having passed quite some time ago, which Inosuke thought was ridiculous. Tanjiro would admit that perhaps it wasn't exactly cherry blossoms, but Inosuke would mock him all the same for being dumb. But then again, Tanjiro's sense of smell is impeccable, so Zenitsu was willing to vouch for him, which would lead to an argument between him and Inosuke, as Tanjiro would take out Rengoku's handguard, which had previously been given to him by Senjiro. And you could say that this scent or feeling was Rengoku watching over their shoulders. And the end of Kyojuro Rengoku Gaiden. Oh my goodness, this story is just way too good. For those of us who really wanted to see more Rengoku content besides the train, this is just amazing. So to receive this along with the details of his very first mission, which we previously made a video on, is just fantastic. A lot of effort went into bringing you guys this video, and so we really hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more Demon Slayer content from us, let us know by being as loud and proud as Rengoku himself. And be sure to subscribe to Plot Armor with notifications on, because when it comes to bringing you some of the best Demon Slayer content on the platform, Plot Armor has you covered. As always, I'm Sliceable Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.